In Minneapolis, they danced in the street with joy and relief. Just steps from where George Floyd took his last breath under the knee of the white police officer Derek Chauvin. Few had dared let themselves believe this moment would come, that the harrowing 9 minutes and 29-second video would end in Mr. Chauvin's conviction for murder. But just after 4 p.m. yesterday, the unbelievable occurred.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty.
Mr. Chauvin sat motionless as the verdicts were read aloud.
Count 2, find the defendant guilty. Verdict count 3, find the defendant guilty.
But outside, the crowds erupted. At George Floyd Square, where the unarmed 46-year-old lost his life for allegedly using a fake $20 bill. And outside the courthouse, where ex-officer Chauvin was declared guilty of 2 counts of murder and 1 of manslaughter. For George Floyd's family, this was the moment they'd been fighting for since May the 25th last year, when their loved one was killed in broad daylight as he begged for his life.
I heard George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe."
And but for the bravery of a 17-year-old bystander who took the video that would go viral, his death would likely be just another statistic. But she pressed record, and that video sparked fury on the streets of Minneapolis and a new civil rights uprising that spread not just across the US, but around the world. It was that same footage that would become the star witness for the prosecution, a clip so raw and powerful that it couldn't be explained away, as hard as Mr. Chauvin's lawyers tried.
It's been a long journey, and I could do nothing but watch, especially in that courtroom over and over and over again as my brother was murdered.
Phalonis Floyd, George's brother, was there in the courtroom as the verdicts were read aloud. Tell me how you felt today when you heard that first verdict come in.
Oh man, it was amazing because I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and now I was praying at the same time. And before I even got in there, I paced myself back and forth, because the feeling that I had, I couldn't control it because the verdict came back less than 24 hours. And just to hear guilty, guilty, guilty to me, and also people of color all around the world, it's a celebration.
It's an indescribable feeling, to say the least. When we heard the first guilty verdict, it was like a buzzer beater in a basketball game. It was just, you just heard the screams and yes, and man, it was indescribable, man. I still got chills right now.
Yeah,
You still got chills.
definitely. Chills are running through his body. I mean, this is an unbelievable moment.
You said your brother would be part of history.
This is what George lived for. He loved to see people happy, loved to see people getting along. He wanted to bring everybody together. And no one could figure out the recipe to do that, but unfortunately, my brother losing his life, that brought everyone together.
We're all so relieved.
That the president was also so relieved he immediately called the Floyd family tells you what this case had come to mean in a country where white police accountability for black bloodshed is all too rare.
We're going to get a lot more done. We're going to get police. We're going to do a lot.
Dear God, we thank you.
The veteran civil rights leader Al Sharpton said the verdict was a watershed moment for racial justice. And it's the beginning of something.
It is the beginning of a new movement. Movements need victories. The George Floyd verdict gave us that victory.
It's your other hand.
And you think that policemen will now stop and think twice before they pull their gun on a black man or woman?
It's the first night policemen in America had to stop and say, wait a minute, I don't want to be like Chauvin.
But the policeman in Ohio didn't think twice yesterday as he shot and killed a 16-year-old black girl just minutes before the verdicts were being read out in the Chauvin trial. Last week, 20-year-old Dante Wright's life was taken in Minneapolis. And since that day, across America, police officers have killed more than 3 people a day, more than half of them black or Latino. Is it any wonder those gathered at the memorial site said full justice could only follow full reform?
Until folks can actually see murder for what it really is, that's when we'll actually continue to see justice.
I actually have a 15-year-old son. He feels hopeful that he don't have to worry about losing his life over a traffic ticket or losing his life over a $20 counterfeit bill.
I'd rather tell my son that the police is here to protect him rather than the police is here to harm me.
That should be a given, but in America, all too often, it's the other way around. The question now, will those agonizing 9 minutes and 29 seconds bring about real change? Or will Derek Chauvin's guilty verdict simply become one historic moment of justice, while the same old system rumbles on?
We're adjourned.
Well, Derek Chauvin has been taken to a state prison about 25 miles from here, and he's being held in a unit separated from other prisoners for his own safety while he awaits his sentencing in about 8 weeks' time, where he does face as many as 40 years in prison. In other words, the rest of his life, given that he is now 45 years old. And while this was the trial of one man, the bigger question remains whether or not his guilty verdict will lead to the kind of change in America that these people here behind me, you can see, have been crying out for. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that would make it easier to prosecute police and bring an end to some of the more egregious practices like chokeholds has passed through Congress but is sitting in the Senate. Joe Biden has said that he is determined to push it through, but I have to say, given the bitterly partisan nature of politics here in America, its passage is by no means guaranteed.